By the time I finish telling you this, 2 soldiers will have been standing at attention in an empty hallway for 40 minutes. No one will have told them they can move. Their arms will ache. Their shirts will be soaked through. A hand of cards will still be sitting on the duty desk where they left it, face up, going nowhere. Neither of them will fully understand yet what they did. They will know it was bad. They will not yet know how bad or to whom. That understanding will arrive in pieces over the next hour and then over the next several weeks, and some of it will not land for years. That is how the important lessons work. They do not arrive all at once. They arrive the way weather arrives. First a change in the air, then the thing itself, then the long afterward where you keep finding water in places you did not expect. Those 2 soldiers are, in that frozen aftermath image, standing in the change in the air. The rest is still coming for them. I did not put them there to be cruel. I want that clear from the start. By the time I let them stand in that hallway, the cruelty in the room was all behind us, and it had not been mine. What I put them in was a lesson, and a lesson is not a punishment, though from the outside, on a hot afternoon, they can look the same. The difference is what it is for. A punishment is for the person delivering it. A lesson is for the person receiving it. I have spent a career learning to tell those 2 apart and to choose the second one, even when the first one would feel better, and this hallway was one more time I had to choose. Let me take you back to how they got there. It was a little after noon, and I was reporting into a new posting, and I had come early. I do that. I like an hour in a place before it knows I am there. I like to see how a unit runs when no one important is watching, because that is the only time you ever see the truth of it. So I came in the side door of the transient staff quarters in physical training gear, sweat still drying from a run, carrying my own 2 bags, no escort, no fanfare, nothing on me that said who I was. There were 2 soldiers at the duty desk, a specialist and a private first class. They had a game of cards going between them spread across the desk, and they were leaned back in their chairs the way you lean when you are certain no one is coming. The specialist looked up when the door opened. He looked at me for about a second and a half. I watched him do the math. Running clothes, 2 bags, a woman he did not recognize. He came up with the wrong answer, the way people do, and he did not check it. "You lost, hun," he said. "Staff quarters are for staff." I did not answer right away. I set my bags down by the wall. He took that for confusion. He stood halfway up, came around the desk, and kicked my duffel across the tile with the side of his boot. It slid until it hit the far wall. The private first class laughed. The specialist grinned and went back to his chair, back to his cards, done with me. "Sit tight," he said, not looking. "Somebody'll come sort you out eventually." I didn't sit. I stood by the wall where my bag had ended up, and I waited. I want to tell you that I was angry. It would make me more relatable if I told you my face went hot. It did not. What I felt was something quieter and much older than anger, a kind of patience I have had to earn the hard way. And I have learned that patience, held right, is a kind of power. So I held it. I stood in a hallway in my running clothes, and I let 2 young soldiers believe they had already won something. That was the mistake they made, not the words. Everyone gets the words wrong sometimes. The mistake was going back to the cards, because it told me they had decided the story was over, and I already knew it was not. Let me tell you who was standing in that hallway, but not the way they would have told it. I was a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. I want to say that plainly, and then set it aside, because the rank is the least interesting thing about me, and it is the only thing anyone ever remembers. Before I was a lieutenant colonel, I was a major, and before that, a captain. And before all of it, I was a 24-year-old engineer lieutenant on a road in Iraq, learning who I was under fire, because you do not get to practice that. You get one take. The road is where the real story lives, and I will get you there, because you cannot understand why a kicked duffel could not touch me until you understand what has. I did not grow up planning to be a soldier. I grew up in an industrial river town in the upper Midwest, the kind of place that used to make things and then stopped. My father worked in a plant that closed. My mother held 2 jobs and did not complain, which taught me more than any leadership school ever did. There was not money for much. There was not a clear road out. I was good at school and good at staying calm when things came apart, and a recruiter noticed the second thing before anyone noticed the first. I went in through an officer program, and I chose engineers, and people asked me why. They still ask me why. The answer is not glamorous. I liked that engineers build things and clear things. I liked that it was useful in a plain way. I did not know yet that the branch would put me at the very front of a road with a whole convoy behind me, looking for the thing built to kill us all. You do not know, at the start, which door you are walking through. You only find out later what was on the other side. I was good at it. I say that plainly because it surprised me. I had spent a childhood being told, in small ways, that I was not the kind of person things worked out for. Then I put on a uniform and found out I was exactly the kind of person the work rewarded. I could stay level when other people came apart. I could hold the whole picture when everyone else was staring at one corner of it. I could stand at the front of a stopped convoy in the worst hour of the worst day and simply keep functioning, and it turned out that this was rare, and the Army knew how to use it. It used it hard. That is a story for another day. This one is about a road. But first I want you to sit in that hallway with me for a second, the way I had to. Because the interesting thing about being underestimated is what it lets you see. When people decide you are nobody, they stop performing for you. They relax. They show you exactly who they are. And in the 10 minutes I stood against that wall, I learned more about the climate of that unit than I would have in a week of briefings. I watched the two of them at the desk. I watched who walked by and whether they said anything. I saw the whole small ecosystem of a hallway that thought no one was watching, and I filed it because that is my job. And I do not get to stop doing my job because I am holding someone else's coat or standing next to my own dumped bag. So I watched. There is a lot you can learn from a hallway if you are willing to be invisible in it. I watched the specialist. Brant, his name tape said. He was the talker. He ran the desk like it was his kingdom. He had the loose confidence of a young soldier who has never once been made to account for himself, which told me something about the people above him. I watched the private first class, Cobb. He was the follower. He laughed a beat after Brant laughed. He looked to Brant before he did anything. He was not cruel. He was just young and unshaped and pointed at the wrong example. I watched who went by. A supply clerk with a stack of folders looked at me, looked at the two of them, and kept walking. That told me something, too. A young lieutenant came through, saw a woman standing by a dumped bag, and did not stop, because he did not want to know. That told me the most of anything. It is not the loud people who tell you the health of a unit. It is the ones who walk past. None of it made me angry. It made me quiet in a different way. I was not standing in that hallway being insulted. I was standing in it taking inventory. I had a whole unit to be responsible for, and here, for free, in running clothes, invisible, I was being handed a clean look at how it behaved when it thought no one who mattered was in the room. You do not get that look twice. You get it once, on the day you arrive, before they know your face. I was not going to waste it being offended. A staff sergeant was the first person to see it. She came down the corridor with a clipboard and a fast walk, headed somewhere, and she went past me, and then she slowed. She looked back. She looked at the duffel against the wall, and at me standing near it, and at the two soldiers at the desk not looking at either, and something in the picture did not add up for her. "Ma'am," she said, coming back, "are you being helped?" "Ma'am. Not Hay. Not you. Ma'am." She did not know who I was. She only knew the picture was wrong. "I'm fine, Staff Sergeant," I said. "Thank you." I asked her one question. I asked it because I wanted to know the answer, and because I could not entirely help myself, which is a flaw of mine. I asked her what the reporting sequence was for the day, who I would see first, and where, and I asked it the way a person asks who has been on the other side of 100 reporting mornings. She answered, and then she looked at me half a second too long, the way a professional does when the shape of a thing has just shifted under them, and I watched her file it somewhere she could get it back. She did not have a name for what she had noticed. She only knew she had noticed it. Then she went on down the hall, and she looked back once more before she turned the corner. I have thought about the difference between how the specialist looked at me and how that staff sergeant looked at me, because it is the whole story in miniature. The specialist looked directly at me from a few feet away with his full attention for the second and a half it took him to sort me, and he got it completely wrong. The staff sergeant caught me sideways from a distance while managing a dozen other things, and something in her snagged on the truth. That is not about intelligence. The specialist was not stupid. It is about what you have trained yourself to look for. He had trained himself to spot who mattered, and a woman in running clothes by a dumped bag did not fit his idea of who mattered. So his eyes filed me and moved on. She had trained herself to spot what was actually happening in a room, which is a different skill entirely, and a person standing with the wrong kind of stillness for her clothes was a thing that was actually happening, and it caught her. One of those two skills is worth having. The Army runs on the people who have it, and most of them are sergeants, and most of them never get thanked for it. Staff sergeants notice things officers are too busy to. I built a career on remembering that. Now the road. It was 2005, and I was a first lieutenant, 24 years old, leading a route clearance platoon in Iraq. If you do not know what route clearance is, it is this. You drive slowly down a road ahead of everyone else, looking for the things buried in it that are built to kill you, and you find them by being the first thing that comes along. That is the job. You are the tripwire with a plan. It is a strange way to spend your youth, staring at the shoulders of a road for the seam of disturbed dirt that means someone was here before you, and it teaches you a kind of attention that never fully leaves. I still read the edges of roads. I will do it until I die. Let me tell you what those days were actually like, because people picture route clearance wrong. They picture speed and noise. It was the opposite. It was slow. It was patient to the point of pain. You crept. You stared. You looked at the same 50 feet of shoulder for what felt like an hour. You learned the road the way a farmer learns a field, and you learned what did not belong on it: a patch of dirt too fresh, a wire too straight, a pile of trash in the wrong place. The whole job was noticing. The whole job was refusing to stop noticing even when nothing had happened for 100 days. Because the 101st was the one that counted, and the road did not care how tired you were. It changes you doing that at 24. It makes you the kind of person who cannot stop noticing. I am still that person. I noticed the cards on the desk. I noticed which soldier laughed first. I noticed the lieutenant who walked past. You do not get to keep the parts of yourself that keep you alive and give back the parts that make you hard to sit next to at dinner. It is one thing. It comes as one thing. My platoon was young. Most of them were. I was 24, and I was one of the older ones, which tells you everything. We were children with a terrible job, and we did it well. And we loved each other the way you only love the people you have been afraid alongside, which is more completely than you will ever love almost anyone in your civilian life. That is the part nobody warns you about. The danger is real, but the danger is not what you carry afterward. What you carry afterward is how well you knew them. I had a corporal named Ben Hoyt. He was 21. He was one of those soldiers who is better than his rank, the kind you find yourself relying on more than the manual says you should, and he had a dry, flat way of talking on the radio that kept the whole platoon level when things got bad. I had a private too, a young one, a kid named Dale Pritchard, who was maybe 2 months in country and still had the look they all have at the start, the look of someone who has not yet had the thing happen that they cannot unhappen. He was a good kid, eager, scared in the way that has not learned to hide yet. Ben looked after him. That was Ben. He looked after all of them, but he took to Pritchard especially, the way an older soldier sometimes adopts a younger one for no reason he could name. He wrote him about small things. He made him check his gear twice. He told him he was going to make it home, and he said it like an order, not a comfort, which is the only way a 19-year-old will believe it. I used to hear them on the radio when they thought the net was quiet, Ben correcting some small thing, Pritchard arguing, Ben winning. It was the sound of the platoon working. It was the sound of everything being, for that hour, all right. The morning of it started ordinary. They all do. That should be against the rules for a day that turns out to matter that much, but no one asked me. We staged before light, engines running. The cold that desserts get at night not yet burned off. We ran the checks. Nobody needed telling. We had done it 1,000 times, and the routine was the closest thing to safety we had. Ben was on Pritchard about his water. Pritchard was insisting he had enough. Ben made him top off anyway. I remember that. I remember the last completely ordinary thing about that morning was Ben Hoyt making a kid drink water. And then we rolled, and the day stopped being ordinary, and it has never fully gone back. I will not draw the ambush out. It does not deserve the drama, and the people who were there do not need it drawn. A device strip initiated under the lead vehicle. The road came apart, and then it was noise and dust and the particular chaos that a road becomes when the thing you spend every day looking for finally finds you first. Pritchard was in the vehicle that got hit. Ben's voice came over the radio, flat, the way it always was, which is how I knew how bad it was, because Ben only went that flat when it was bad. LT, Pritchard's pinned, the truck's smoking. I went. That is the whole of the decision, and I distrust anyone who makes a speech out of it. You go. You get out of your vehicle and you go toward the smoking one, and the going is not the hard part. The going is almost nothing. What comes after the going is the hard part, all the years of it, and no one puts that in the award. I got to the vehicle. Pritchard was half out of it, pinned, and he was doing the thing that a terrified 20-year-old does, which is to have already decided he was going to die and to be arguing with anyone who told him otherwise. I can't, he kept saying. I can't. Yes, you can, I told him. You can. And then I made it true. That is the job too, making the thing you said true after you have said it. I want to be careful here. There is a way of telling this part that makes it sound like a film. Cleaner and braver than it was, and telling it that way is a small betrayal of the people who were actually on that road. It was not clean. It was loud past describing. It was confusing. For the first several seconds, I was not brave. I was busy, which I have since learned is what bravery mostly is up close. You do not have time to be afraid. There is too much to do and only you to do it. The fear waits. It is patient. It will have you all to itself later at 3 a.m. for years. What I did was not complicated. That is the thing about it. I got to the vehicle. I got Pritchard loose. I got the platoon's fire pointed the right way. I got the vehicles that could still move into a position that made sense. I got the wounded consolidated. I made 100 small, ordinary decisions fast. And none of them was heroic, and all of them together were the difference between most of us coming home and none of us. That is what it actually is. It is not one big brave thing. It is 100 small, correct things done quickly while everything screams at you to stop. I got him loose. I got him moving. I got the extraction organized under fire, and it worked, and most of us came off that road. Not all of us. Ben Hoyt kept the enemy's heads down so the rest of us could move, and he stayed up doing it a few seconds longer than the arithmetic allowed, and a road that no longer exists took him from a family that still does. I did not see it happen. For a long time, I told the story as though I had, which was not honesty. It was me punishing myself with a picture I had not even earned by seeing. I did not see it. I was pulling a screaming 20-year-old across the dirt when the covering fire behind me went quiet. And quiet in the middle of a fight is the loudest thing there is. They gave me a bronze star with valor for that day. I stood in a formation, and someone pinned it on me, and there was a folded flag going to a family in another part of the country at roughly the same time, and I have never once been able to make those two things sit on the same scale. Ben got a flag, I got a ribbon. You do not make change between those two currencies. You carry them in separate hands and you keep walking, and that, more than anything they teach you at any school, is what it means to wear the uniform for a while. I wrote to Ben's family. They do not fully prepare you for the letters, and I do not think they can. I sat in a plywood room with a pen and a blank sheet, and I tried to put a 21-year-old man into words for the people who made him. I failed. Everyone fails at that. I sent the failure anyway because a failed letter is better than no letter, and because they deserved to hear from the officer who was standing on that road when the covering fire went quiet. His mother wrote back, "She did not blame me. I had braced for blame because it would have fit the shape of what I was carrying, and instead she thanked me, and thanking me was worse. And I have kept her letter in a drawer for 19 years and taken it out maybe 4 times because it is almost too much to look at. Then the years did what years do. They stacked up. I made captain. I made major. I went to the schools and took the commands and got good at the parts of the job that have nothing to do with roads, the budgets and the boards, and the endless, careful management of people. By every outside measure, I was a success. But I carried Ben through all of it. I carried the difference between being decorated and being whole, and I learned that you do not get over a thing like that. You only get better at carrying it. Not because it gets lighter, because you get stronger and you learn where to put your hands. Every so often, in a meeting, in a perfectly ordinary military day, I would find myself listening for a flat, dry voice on a radio, and it would not be there, and I would keep going. That is the job. He would have wanted me to. There was nothing else to do. The young private I pulled off that road was named Dale Pritchard. Remember the name? He did. Now you know what was standing in that hallway in running clothes, next to a duffel someone had kicked across the floor. Not a lost dependent. Not a nobody who could be sorted out later. A person who had already been handed the heaviest thing a person can be handed and had not set it down. So the 2 soldiers played their cards, and I waited, and the hallway held its small false peace, and then a man came in from the far end of it. He was a sergeant major. I could see that from across the hall, the way you can always see it, the bearing of a senior non-commissioned officer who has spent 30 years being the spine of every room he walks into. He was walking with purpose, headed somewhere. And then he saw me, and he stopped mid-step. I want to describe what stopping mid-step actually looks like on a man like that, because it is not a small thing. A sergeant major does not stop mid-step. They flow through buildings. They do not freeze in hallways. This one did. One boot came down and the other did not, and he stood there with his weight wrong, staring at me, and I watched 19 years run backward across his face all at once. I knew the eyes. He was a grown man now, weathered, gray coming in at the sides, a chest full of the things a career gives you. But I knew the eyes. The last time I had seen them clearly, they had been full of dust and terror, looking up at me from the dirt beside a burning vehicle, a 20-year-old certain he was about to die. 19 years is a long time. It is long enough to become a different person. He had. The private I pulled off that road had been a frightened boy. This was a sergeant major, one of the most senior enlisted soldiers in the Army, the kind of man whose presence reorders a room without a word. He had done all of that. He had built a whole life on top of the road I last saw him on. And here he was frozen in a hallway because the woman standing by a kicked duffel in running clothes was the reason any of it existed. I had not known he was here. I want to be clear about that. This was not a reunion I arranged. I did not know where he had ended up. I had thought about him over the years, the way you think about the ones you got out, wondering if they made it, if they were all right, if the getting out had been worth it to them. You do not usually get to find out. Most of the time, the road just closes behind you, and you carry the not knowing. And then, every so often, the not knowing walks in from the far end of a hallway wearing a sergeant major's stripes. And you learn that it was worth it, that he made it, that he built something, and it takes the floor out from under you a little. Dale, I said, quietly. Just his name. The deck of cards slid off the edge of the desk. I do not know if the specialist knocked it or if it just went. 52 cards fanned across the tile at his feet. Nobody moved to pick them up. The specialist looked at the sergeant major. He looked at me. He looked back at the sergeant major, and he did not understand yet, but he understood that something enormous was happening, the way you feel weather change before you can name it. That is the moment I want you to sit in, because it is the true center of the whole thing, and it is not the moment people expect. People expect the center to be the reveal, the rank, the comeuppance. It is not. The center is the half second where the person who dismissed you realizes he has misread the room and does not yet know how badly. There is a specific stillness to it. The grin has not fully left his face. Part of him is still committed to the story he told himself 2 minutes ago, the story where I was nobody, and part of him has just seen his sergeant major stop like he hit glass. And the two stories cannot both be true, and you can watch him hang there between them, unable to go back and afraid to go forward. I have been on the other side of that stillness more than once in my life. I have learned that there is nothing to do in it but wait. You do not push. You do not gloat. You just let the two stories finish fighting, and you let the true one win on its own, because a truth someone arrives at himself holds, and a truth you shove at him only makes him defend the lie. So I waited. I let the specialist hang there, and I watched the story he had told himself begin to come apart in his face, one piece at a time. "Sergeant Major," he said. "You good?" The sergeant major did not answer him. He was still looking at me, and then something moved through him, and it was not the soft thing, it was the other thing, and I saw it coming before he did. He turned on the two of them. His voice, when it came, was very low, which is the most dangerous a sergeant major's voice ever gets. The shouting you can survive. It is the quiet you have to worry about. "On your feet," he said, "both of you, right now." They came up fast, chairs scraped. The private first class knocked his over and did not stop to write it. "Attention," Pritchard said. "You do not move, you do not speak, you do not breathe wrong." And they went to attention, and they stayed there. And this is the part where I had to make a decision, because I could see exactly where he was going, and I could see that if I let him go there, it would not be justice. It would be grief wearing justice as a costume, because it was not really about the two soldiers. Not for him. For him, it had just become about a road in 2005 and a debt he had been carrying for 19 years. And the unbearable fact that the officer who had carried him off that road had walked into his own building and been treated like nothing on his own floor. He was not going to correct these two. He was going to destroy them, and he was going to do it to pay a debt that they had nothing to do with, and afterward he would feel worse, not better. I have seen a lot of reckonings driven by someone else's guilt. They are the ugliest kind. They are never really about the person being reckoned with. And there was more to it than that. There always is. Pritchard was not only furious, he was ashamed. This was his building. These were, in some chain of responsibility that ran up through him, his soldiers. And they had treated the person he owed his life to like trash on the floor right here on his watch. That is a specific kind of pain for a senior non-commissioned officer. Your whole identity is that the standard holds where you stand. And the standard had just failed in front of the one person you would have died to impress. He was not going to correct two soldiers. He was going to try to burn the shame out of himself, using them as the fire, and it would not work because it never works, and I could not let him do it, both for their sake and for his. There is a thing I have learned about power, and it took me most of a career to learn it. The moment you have the most of it is the moment you are most tempted to spend it badly. When the room turns your way, when the person who wronged you suddenly understands, when everyone is waiting to see how hard you will bring it down, that is the exact moment to be most careful because everything is lined up to let you be cruel and call it justice. I had watched officers fail that test my whole life. I had promised myself a long time ago that I would not. So I stepped in. "Sergeant Major," I said, quiet, level. "Let me handle it." He looked at me. His jaw was working. There were things in his face that had been waiting 19 years for somewhere to go. "Ma'am," he said, "they put your gear on the floor." "I know what they did," I said. "Let them stand a minute, then let me handle it." He held there a moment, fighting it. I understood the fight. Everything in him wanted to close the distance between the wrong and the correction as fast as possible to make the world right by making it loud. That is a good instinct, mostly. It is the instinct that makes a sergeant major worth having, but there is a point where it stops serving the soldier and starts serving the anger, and he was past that point and could not see it because he was standing too close to 19 years of his own history to see anything clearly. That is what I was for in that moment. Not rank, distance. I was the only person in the hallway far enough from the wound to aim the response. "Dale," I said, quieter still, just for him. "You have been carrying this a long time, I know, but you do not get to set it down on them. That is not what it is for." Something in his shoulders came down half an inch. Not all the way, but enough. He gave me the hallway. He stepped back to the wall, and he stood there himself, a kind of witness now instead of the storm. And he let me take it. And here's the thing about the standing. I let them stand there, at attention, not knowing for a while. That was deliberate, not cruelty. The not knowing is the lesson. A young soldier who is being screamed at knows exactly where to put the feeling, which is on to the person screaming. A young soldier standing in a silent hallway, with a sergeant major shaking with something he does not understand, and a woman in running clothes he cannot place. That soldier has nowhere to put the feeling but inward, where it will actually do some good. I had learned that a long time ago, too. The loudest correction is often the quietest one. So they stood, and the hallway was silent, and the cards lay on the floor. I have thought about those minutes, what was going on inside two young heads while they stood there not knowing. At first it would have been fear, the simple animal fear of a sergeant major's low voice. But fear burns off. It cannot sustain itself for 40 minutes. What comes after the fear is the useful part. The mind starts working. It goes back over the morning, the bag, the word, the card game. It starts to assemble a picture it does not want to see. And somewhere in that silent hallway, before anyone told them anything, I think both of them had already begun to understand that they had done something they could not take back to a person they could not name, and that is a heavier thing to carry than any dressing down, because you built it yourself, in your own head, out of your own conduct. That is the lesson doing its own work. All I had to do was not interrupt it. There is a discipline in not interrupting. Everything in you wants to fill a silence like that, to explain, to correct, to make it land. You have to trust the quiet to do the work. I have gotten better at it over the years. The younger version of me would have talked. The older one has learned that the most powerful thing in a room is very often the person who is willing to say nothing and let the truth arrive on its own legs. I could have let the sergeant major bury them. Understand that. I had the right, and he had the will, and a word from me would have ended 2 young careers before lunch. It would have felt like justice for about a day, but I have never once found that as satisfying up close as it looks from a distance. Mostly it just feels like watching someone drop something breakable and being too far away to catch it. I did not want to break 2 soldiers to pay a debt. I wanted to hand them a standard they would carry for 30 years. Those are different things, and I have learned to tell them apart. This was, in a way, the first real decision I made in that unit. I had not reported in yet. I was still in running clothes. Officially, I was nobody in that hallway. But a command does not start when the paperwork says it does. It starts the moment you decide it does, and mine had started somewhere over the highway that morning, thinking about the people I was driving toward. So this was my first act as their commander, whether they knew it or not. What I did with 2 soldiers who had wronged me was going to tell everyone who heard about it, and they would all hear about it, exactly what it cost to be human around me. I had served under both kinds of leader, the kind who collected these moments and spent them on their own power, and the kind who could look at a person's worst 2 minutes and still see the person. I knew which kind of unit I wanted. It started here, with 2 young soldiers standing against a wall in front of the exact audience that would carry the story out into the ranks. When I decided it was time, I did not do the talking. I let Pritchard do it, because it needed to come from him, and because he needed to say it as much as they needed to hear it. 19 years ago, he said to the two of them, his voice steadier now. I was your age. I was on my back in the dirt on the far side of the world, pinned under a truck that was on fire, and I had already decided I was going to die there. And this officer came and got me. She got me loose, and she got me out, and she did it while people were trying very hard to kill everyone on that road. The reason I am standing in this hallway to be disappointed in the two of you is her. Do you understand what I'm telling you? He did not say my rank first. I noticed that. He said the road first. He told them what happened before he told them who I was. And by the time the rank came up, it did not matter next to the road, and that is exactly right, because that is the true order of things, and almost nobody gets it right. I watched the two young faces change. It is a particular thing to watch. A person understanding not just that they were wrong, but the exact size of how wrong. The specialist's face went from confusion to something much worse, the specific gray of a young man who has just understood that the person he kicked a bag past is the reason his sergeant major has a life. The private first class had stopped even trying to keep his composure. He was 20 years old, and he was standing very straight, and his eyes were wet, and he was not going to be the same after this, which was the whole point. I want to say something about that, because it is easy to enjoy it, and I did not. There is a version of me, a younger version, who would have savored those two faces, who would have stood in that hallway and drunk the moment down. I understand that version. Contempt is a real wound, and there is a real justice in watching it come back on the person who dealt it. But I've never actually lived there. And standing in that hallway, I felt mostly a kind of weariness. And under the weariness, something close to sorrow, because I could see the rest of these two young men's day laid out in front of them, and the weeks of replaying it, and I did not want any of that for them, not really. I only wanted them to have learned the thing. The suffering was not the point. The suffering is never the point. The lesson is the point, and the suffering is just the packaging it sometimes comes wrapped in, and if you could get the lesson to a person without the packaging, you always should. Pritchard was not done. He told them the rest of it, plainly, without theater. He told them that the woman they had kicked a bag past had made a decision on a road when she was younger than they were now, a decision that cost her something she still carried, and that they would never know the weight of it, and that the least they could do, the very least, was to stop deciding in a second and a half who mattered and who did not. He told them that the uniform is full of people whose worst day would break you, and that you cannot see it on them, and that this is exactly the point. You cannot see it, so you assume it is there in everyone and you treat them accordingly, or you are not fit to wear the thing yourself. It was a better speech than any I could have given, because it came from the one person in the hallway who had been on the receiving end of exactly what I did. He was the proof. He was standing there being the proof, gray at the temples, a sergeant major, alive. The staff sergeant had drifted back down the hall by then, drawn by the quiet, and she stood at the edge of it, and she caught my eye. I knew something was wrong, ma'am, she said low. I could not have told you what. I know you did, staff sergeant, I said. That is why you are going to be useful to me. And I meant it, and I saw her understand that I meant it, and a working trust that would last for years started right there in a hallway full of dropped cards, which is how most of the real things in a career actually start. Not in ceremonies, in a sentence traded sideways in a hard moment. I let the two soldiers stand a while longer, 40 minutes all told, from the first card to the last. And then I released them, and I did the talking myself, and I did not do it to crush them. I did it to name the thing they would carry. Look at me, I said. They did. You did not see a soldier this morning. You saw running clothes and a bag and a woman you did not recognize, and you decided in about a second and a half that I was nobody, and you went back to your game. I am not going to end you for that, because everyone in this hallway has done it, including me, and a person who has never been wrong is no use to anyone. But you are going to learn to look twice. In our line of work, the person you write off as nobody is very often the one who turns out to matter most, and sometimes, if you are lucky, the one who comes back for you. Do not make me explain that to you again. I do not think I will have to. No, ma'am, the specialist said. His voice was not steady. Pick up your cards, I said, and square away my gear, not because it is mine, because it is someone's, and you do not yet know whose anything is. That is the whole lesson. Go. They went. The private first class squared my duffel against the wall like it was made of glass. I want to tell you what happened to those two, because I think it matters, and because the story is not honest without it. I did not have them removed. I did not put anything in writing. What I did instead was harder for them and better for everyone. I kept them. I made a point, in the weeks after, of knowing their names and their work. I gave the specialist, Brandt, more responsibility, not less, because a young soldier, with that much certainty in him, is either going to become a leader or a problem, and the fork between those two is whether someone bothers to aim him. I aimed him. The last I heard, he was a sergeant himself. and by every account, he had become the kind of non-commissioned officer who looks twice, who notices the quiet soldier in the corner, who checks the answer before he acts on it. I would like to believe a hallway had something to do with that. I think it did. The private first-class Cobb, I worried about less. He had followed. Followers are easy to redirect once you give them someone worth following. He needed a better example than the one he had at that desk, and he got one, and he was fine. I am not telling you this to make myself sound generous. I am telling you because it is the whole argument. If I had burned them down in that hallway, I would have gotten a satisfying afternoon, and the army would have gotten 2 bitter soldiers who learned to hide. Instead, I spent a harder currency, patience, and the army got 2 better ones. That is the trade. It is almost always the trade. Most people take the satisfying afternoon. I have tried my whole career to take the other thing. Pritchard found me a little later, in a stairwell off the corridor when the hall had emptied out. We stood there a moment, 2 survivors of the same road, 19 years, and a lot of rank between us and no distance at all. "I have thought about you," he said. "Every year, on the day, I did not know how to find you. I did not know if I was allowed to." "You were always allowed to, Dale," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the thing that took the floor out from under me, the thing I did not see coming and have not stopped carrying since. "I named my son Ben," he said. "After the corporal. I never told you that. I figured you should know that somewhere there is a 9-year-old named Ben Hoyt Pritchard who exists because 2 people came and got me off that road. I could only ever thank one of them, so I named my boy after the one I could not. I did not have anything to say to that. There are things you do not answer. You just stand in a stairwell and let them be true." We stood there a while, 2 people who had been on the same road at the worst hour of their lives, 19 years and a lot of rank apart and no distance at all. He told me about his career, in pieces, where he had gone, what he had done with the life I helped him keep. He had made something of it. He had made a great deal of it, and every rung of it, he said, he had climbed with the day on the road, sitting under him like bedrock the day he decided that if he lived, he would be worth the saving. I have thought about that a lot since. That the getting out is not the gift. The gift is what the person does with the years after. Pritchard had spent his well. It is the closest thing to comfort I have ever gotten about that road, and I got it in a stairwell from a sergeant major with gray at his temples, who used to be a boy I dragged through the dirt. He asked me before we went back out why I had stopped him, why I had not let him bury the 2 soldiers when I had every right, and he had every will. I told him the truth. I told him that breaking them would have felt good for a day, and taught them nothing, that a soldier who is humiliated learns only to hide, and that I did not want 2 more people in the army who had learned to hide. I wanted 2 people who had learned to look twice. You do not get that by destroying someone. You get it by telling them the truth and trusting them to do something with it. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said that he wished someone had led him that way when he was young, and I told him that from here on, someone would, because that was my job now, and he nodded. And something settled between us that had been unsettled for 19 years. The duffel on the floor did not cost me anything. I want to be exact about that. Not one thing. Ben Hoyt cost me everything, and he is the reason, the only reason, that I did not need 2 young soldiers to see me in order to know what I was. When you have already paid the highest price there is, the small change of someone's contempt does not register. People call that strength. It is not strength. It is that the scale inside you has been shown the largest weight there is. And after that, a bag kicked across a floor weighs exactly nothing, because you know what a real weight feels like. And this is not one. I think about the scale a lot. The world spends a great deal of energy trying to tell you what you weigh. Some days it tells you that you are nothing, a woman in running clothes who can be waved off. Other days it tells you that you are a hero and pins a ribbon on you, and that is its own way of not seeing you, its own coat handed over without a look. Neither one has ever had much to do with me. The truth of me does not live in either of those hallways. It lives in a plywood room with a failed letter. It lives on a road with the covering fire gone quiet. It lives in a drawer with a mother's forgiveness folded inside it, because I can only bear to look at it a few times in a life. The people who dismiss you and the people who lionize you are making the same mistake from opposite ends. They are deciding who you are from the outside. The only defense against both is to know, all the way down, before either of them opens their mouth. And the only way I know to get that knowledge is to pay for it, which I did, which Ben did, which is the part of the story that never goes in the citation. I reported in that afternoon, still in my running clothes. I could have changed. I chose not to. I wanted to remember, and I wanted the people watching to remember, that the woman reporting for duty was the same woman who had been told staff quarters were for staff, that those were not two different people. That the person you dismiss and the person you answer to are very often the exact same person, and the only thing that changed was what you knew. I signed the papers in my running clothes with dust still on my shoes. The officer taking my report tried, gently, to suggest I might want to change first, and I told him no, thank you, this was fine. And I think he understood that there was a reason, even if he did not know it. There was a reason. I wanted every person in that headquarters who had heard about the hallway, and by then that was most of them, to see the same woman in the same clothes sign for the same authority they had watched two soldiers wave off that morning. I wanted the two images welded together in their minds so they could never again come apart. The nobody and the commander, one person, one set of running clothes. The whole distance between contempt and command collapsed into a single afternoon. You do not get to teach that lesson twice. You get the one day, the arrival day, before they know your face, and I was not going to waste it by changing into something that made it easy for them to keep the two images separate. The staff sergeant, S-Step, held a door for me on my way through, the same corridor I had been told to wait in. I stopped. I am going to need people around me who read a room, I said. You read this one when two soldiers could not. I do not forget things like that. I will be around, ma'am, she said. I know you will, I said, and I went on through. And the hallway behind me was quiet, and the cards were back in the deck, and it had changed nothing about who I was, and everything about what the people in that building knew about it. And those are not the same thing, and the whole story is the space between them. The days after were ordinary, which is how you know a lesson took. Word of the hallway went through the unit the way those things do. Quietly, in the version people tell each other when the leadership is not around, which is the only version that matters. I never told the story myself. I did not have to. Pritchard did not tell it either, not the way you would tell a story to make a point. He did not need to. The two soldiers told it, eventually, on themselves, which is the only way that kind of story does any good. And by the time it had made its rounds, it had done more to set the tone of that unit than any speech I could have stood up and given. Everyone knew, without my saying a word, exactly what it cost to write someone off around me. That is worth more than 100 briefings. You cannot brief a culture into existence. You can only show it once, clearly, on the first day, before anyone knows your face. Estep became exactly what I thought she would be. She had the thing you cannot teach, the noticing, the read of a room, and I put her where that mattered, and she never once let me down. Pritchard and I served that tour as a command team, an officer and a sergeant major who had a road between them that neither of us ever mentioned in front of anyone else, and never needed to. It was under everything. It made us better at the work. There is a particular kind of trust between two people who are on the same road at the same hour, and you cannot manufacture it, and I will not pretend I did anything to earn this one except turn some trucks around a long time ago and be lucky enough to see what the luck bought. And once, months in, I met the boy. Pritchard brought his family by. His son shook my hand very seriously, the way a 9-year-old does when he has been told this matters even if he does not know why. Ben Hoyt Pritchard, 9 years old. Alive in the plainest sense, existing at all because two people came and got his father off a road before he was ever born. I shook a small hand, and I thought about a flag folded into a triangle 19 years before, and I held both of those things, the boy and the flag, in the same moment, and for once they did not fight each other. For once they sat still together. It did not fix the arithmetic. Nothing fixes the arithmetic. But it was the closest the two hands have ever come to holding the same thing, and I am grateful for it, and I did not expect to be given it, and I do not think I will be given it again. I have thought about how to end this, and I am not telling it to make two young soldiers look small. They do not look small to me now. They look like two people who got handed a hard truth early, before it could cost them anything worse than a bad afternoon, and who I have every reason to believe are going to be better for it. There are worse things to be than a person who learned it young. I am telling it for you, whoever you are, if you have ever set your bag down in a room where someone had already decided you did not belong. Maybe it is a job where they keep handing your ideas to someone louder. Maybe it is a family that settled on a version of you a long time ago and stopped checking whether it was still true. Maybe it is a whole life of being measured by the surface, the clothes, the quiet, the way you wait, instead of by the weight you have actually carried. If any of that is you, then you already know the feeling of standing in a hallway, holding still while someone decides you are nobody. And you may have believed, the way I once half believed, that the only way to answer it is to make them see, right then, to correct the record, to spend your dignity buying back their respect. I am here to tell you that you do not have to. Their estimate of you is not a bill you are required to pay. Here is the only thing I know for certain after all of it. Your worth does not wait on anyone's permission to see it. If someone decides in a second and a half that you are nobody, you do not have to spend your dignity correcting them, and you do not have to hand back your composure to complete the exchange. Set your bags down. Keep your quiet. The truth has a way of walking in from the far end of the hall on its own, in its own time, and when it does, you do not need to say a word. You just have to still be standing there, exactly who you always were. That is not weakness. That, I have come to believe, is the whole of it. The end.